Welcome back to Coachology in 20, the space where we discuss coaching concepts in 20 minutes. If you're tuned in, please say hi. Let me know where you're tuned in from. And if you're new to coaching, get your tablet ready, get your notebook ready, get ready to take some notes. This is going to be new concepts to you. If you're an experienced coach, then please get ready to share your wisdom, share your experience. Let's use this space to learn from each other. And for those experienced coaches that think they're really great, maybe you've been in the industry for a year, 2 years, 5 years, then I've got a test for you at the end of today's session around our topic of questions in coaching. So please stick around if you're an experienced coach to test your knowledge around the questions that you're asking your clients. I can see we've got Adele tuned in. Thank you so much for being here, Adele. It's great to see you here every week. Razan, it's also wonderful to see you here every week as well. Thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to both of your inputs here whilst we talk about questions in coaching. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the types of questions in coaching, what questions we should avoid as a coach, what types of questions we should adopt as a coach. And then I'm going to go through a bit of a test with you so you can start to put some questions that I'm going to ask you that are coaching style questions. And you're going to have to tell me whether you think it's a leading question or a non-leading question. And we're going to have a bit of a discussion why. A lot of coaches, when you're experienced, we still fall into the trap of asking leading questions. A lot of coaches, when you get into coaching, you generally come into it because people come to you for advice. And one of the biggest eye-openers that we have as a coach is that we don't actually give advice as a coach. And it's been a lot, we've observed this, a lot of coaching minds. I've observed this a lot in my own practice when I first started, is that jump between not giving advice and asking questions is quite difficult. Then on that journey, what coaches tend to do is replace that advice with leading questions, which is one of the questions we should avoid as a coach. We're going to talk about this and go deep into this today. But just to get us warmed up, I want to ask you a question. I want you to tell me some powerful questions you like to ask as a coach. But your best questions that you've ever asked as a coach in the comments box. We always see organizations, we see coaches sharing this, the top 10 powerful questions to ask your clients. Here's a list of 20 questions to ask your clients that are powerful. What do you think constitutes a powerful question, and what powerful questions do you ask your clients? I'm not actually going to share any examples with you right now. Rosanna is saying, what else? That is one of the most industry trended ones. What else? And I'm going to talk about that in a second because we always see this. Tell me more, or what else? Go a bit further. If I had £1 for every time I've asked this question, I've been at an event where they're talking about powerful questions and people term and use that what else question, I would be a very rich man. I'm not going to give any examples, and it's all going to come clear why I'm not giving examples in a moment. What other powerful questions have we asked? Adele is saying, I'm curious, tell me why that is important to you. It's a really good tool. Why is that important? Quite a powerful question as well. What else? What other powerful questions do we ask as a coach? Now, there's a reason why you're typing in your powerful questions. There's a reason why I'm not giving any examples. And that's because as much as many people tell you there's lots of powerful questions you can ask in coaching, there's no such thing as a powerful question. We could share some of the best coaching questions that have led to aha moments in our coaching practice together here as a list in the chat. But what we're missing here when it comes to powerful questioning, powerful question is a technique. And what we're missing here is the context. So just because one question you ask to one individual, to one client, seemed to open up something that was an aha moment or something powerful for them, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have the same power in the next context. So what I want you to take away, one of the key things I want you to take away from today is that there's no such thing as a powerful question, but there is the powerful question formula. Powerful question is a technique. And that formula consists of the context, the articulation, which is what we're talking about. We're looking at powerful questions. So the questions that were shared in the chat there is all around the articulation, the words we choose to use to ask the question, plus our tone, our body language would also fall into that as well. So powerful question has a formula. You might have the perfect question, but if you ask that out of context, if you ask it in the wrong tone with the wrong body language, it's no longer going to be a powerful question. And if you want to work your way to becoming an experienced professional coach and you really want to ask powerful questions, then you need to work on all three of these areas. You need to spot the right context for the right question. You need to be able to articulate your question in a way that isn't compound or double-barreled, in a way that is clear for your clients to understand. And you also need to have the right tone and body language in that context as well for the question to come across as being powerful. So there's lots of great questions we can ask. We can practice articulation. We can share ideas on the questions that we ask our clients. But without the context or the tone, there is a risk that it won't be powerful. So let's start off with looking at the types of questions that we should avoid in coaching. So the first one is closed questions. So as I mentioned, if you're an experienced coach, this should be a bit of a recap. If you're new to coaching, this will be a new learning for you today. But for the experienced coaches, I do have a test towards the end of today. So please do stay tuned for the little test in terms of questions we should avoid and questions we should adopt. So the first one is closed questions. What's a closed question? Nice and simple. It's those questions that we ask that have a yes or no answer. So if we're asking questions like, do you have this? Do you have that? Are you interested in this? Would this be an option? Anything that leads the client to a yes or no answer is what's known as a closed question. So we need to avoid closed questions. One, because if they're closed, they're generally going to be leading questions. Or two, if they're closed questions, it's going to kill the conversation quite quickly. And we're not coaching here. We're taking the conversation to dead ends. So we avoid closed questions as a coach to keep the flow of the conversation going and making sure that we're not leading the agenda with the client. Now, there is a form of closed questions we can adopt, and I'm going to talk about that when we get to the place of questions we can adopt as a coach. I can see we've got Chantel tuned in. Chantel, it's great to see you here. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see you. So what else should we avoid? What other types of questions should we avoid as a coach? The second type of question that we need to avoid as a coach is what's known as compound questions, or also known as double-barreled questions. And these are multiple questions that we ask in sequence of each other. So for example, I could ask you, what is a powerful question? Tell me some powerful questions that you know, and I could ask a series of questions. Now, the reason we avoid this, again, is two reasons. One, asking multiple questions is going to confuse the client. Which questions should they ask? If you ask a second question, they're going to forget the first question that you ask. And the second reason we need to avoid it is because it shows at times a lack of confidence as a coach. Coaches that fall into the habit of asking compound questions generally come from a place of not having confidence in the way that they've articulated their first question. So how do you work to build that confidence and build that belief so the first question that you ask is articulated well and you leave it there for the client to respond to? So we avoid compound questions as a coach. Very, very important. The most important type of question that we should avoid as a coach is leading questions. These are questions in which we're asserting our own values, our own assumptions. Really bad leading questions will have an element of judgment in there as well. So it's any questions that we're asking that's steering the client into our agenda or sometimes into what we think or believe might be the right answer. And the risk of asking leading questions is it breaks rapport. If you're trying to lead the client down a certain line of question, which you think, maybe you think it's your intuition ticking in, maybe you think you've seen this similar scenario with a previous client, so you're asking the questions to get them to a certain point. And if you're incorrect, this is going to severely break the rapport with the client. The other reason being is it's not coaching. Leading questions are on that borderline, that gray area of giving advice. Remember, in our ethical codes, we have a duty to let the client lead the session. The whole agenda needs to be led by the client. The moment leading questions come in, that agenda stays away from the client's agenda into our agenda as a coach. So we must avoid leading questions as a coach. And finally, the fourth and final one I'm going to talk about today, the type of question that we should avoid as a coach, is what's known as rhetorical questions. So these are questions that we ask for a bit of impact or a bit of emphasis that don't require an answer. So I could say, that sounds really great, doesn't it? That doesn't need to be asked. That doesn't it requires an answer. It's a rhetorical question. I could say that was really powerful, right? And that right or doesn't it, those little bits that we add on the end of a statement that we make that statement a rhetorical question that doesn't require an answer. And remember, we don't do this as a coach. We don't ask rhetorical questions because, one, they're redundant. They don't have any terms of response. It kills the line of conversation. And second of all, it can also our way of putting in our assumptions, our judgment, and also our thoughts and advice. We might be giving our opinion and then saying, is that right? Now, I'm going to talk about that because is that right can be used in different contexts as well, where we're not giving our opinion, when we're looking at clarity. We'll talk about that in a moment. So the fourth type there is rhetorical questions. I can see we've got a spike of people just tuned in. So we've just looked at the four types of questions that we should avoid as a coach. The first was open, the second was compound, the third was leading, and the fourth is rhetorical. Now, those are the questions we need to avoid as a coach. Let's look at the questions that we should adopt as a coach. Coaching questions that will help us move the conversation forward and keep the flow of conversation with our clients. So first of all, open questions. We talked about closed questions. What's an open question? It's your why, what, where, when, and how questions. Any question that starts with one of those five is generally going to be an open question. It's a curious question that's going to lead the not lead the agenda, but it's going to open the client up to sharing more information and leading and guiding the conversation to be more structured and more constructive rather than a series of closed questions. So why is that important to you? How do you think this might look for you in the future? What is it that happened here? I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but it's the why, where, what, where, and how. I said where, how, when there. So it's when and how. I said where twice there. So those are your open questions. The second type of questions are that we adopt as a coach is what's known as hypothetical questions. And these are one of my favorite types of questions in coaching. And generally they start with the word if. So if you're thinking about hypothetical questions, any question that starts with if, as long as we're not giving context, guidance, and advice within the next bit that follows that, it's generally a hypothetical question. And hypothetical questions are questions that take the client out of their current thinking, the current scenario, the current situation, and puts them into a hypothetical situation, a situation that hasn't happened, a different area, different perspective of looking at something. So when we ask those questions, we move them into that hypothetical space. It helps them think differently. It helps them start to think about things from a different perspective. One of the most famous types of hypothetical questions that is talked about in our profession that a lot of people learn is what's known as the miracle question. Let me know if you've heard of the miracle question in the comments box. I talked about this before as well on one of my lives, but I like to call this the magic wand question. So miracle question, magic wand. And basically it's a hypothetical question that if you woke up tomorrow and a miracle had happened and you'd achieved this goal, what's the first thing you would notice? Or if you had a magic wand and we could wave this magic wand and what you wanted happened, what's the first step that led you to that? Something along the lines of putting them into a hypothetical question. If you notice, for those of you who are on our program at Coaching Minds, we have our coaching psychology module 3, which looks at cognitive behavioral coaching and also transaction analysis. A lot of the models that you use in cognitive behavioral coaching are hypothetical models that are there and framed to put our clients into a different perspective, into a hypothetical situation that helps them change their perspective. So hypothetical questions are a big one. Another one that I love, and this is great to help you measure and for the client to measure how they're feeling, where they're at, is scaling questions. Scaling questions are simple. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 5, 1 to 100, whatever feels right for you, let me know how you feel about this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how productive do you currently feel? So you might be working with a client that is working on productivity. You might want to start to get a measure of where they're at right now. And then the scaling question is something you can come back to at the end of the session, at the end of the coaching relationship, to see how they're feeling about their productivity or their goal right now. So scaling questions are there to help us measure how the client is feeling themselves. So we don't give them scores as a coach. We're not there to give advice or tell the clients where they're at, but we can ask those questions so we can get a gauge on how they're currently feeling about their goal. And then when we're working through the coaching, we can use these as temperature checks and also to see how maybe they've progressed in terms of their feelings. Scaling questions are really great ways to introduce and start to measure the impact of our coaching. A lot of coaches fall into the trap that we need to give a feedback survey. How was I as a coach? How did you find that? What useful things did you get? Scaling questions are an indirect way of actually objectively measuring your coaching sessions, which is a better way than just seeking feedback. You can observe the progress of your coaching by asking questions like, what has been your key takeaway from today? On a scale of 1 to 10, how useful have you found our session? Something like that at the end of your coaching. What other questions should we adopt? The final one today, so the fourth one, there's lots of other questions. I've seen Adele mention reflective style questions. There's lots of other questions, but I don't have time in 20 minutes to cover them all. But the other one I want to talk about, because we need to be clear on this, and the clue's in the word as well, so another way of clarity, but clarity questions. So we can adopt clarity questions, and we should do, because that is a way that we can check that we're on the right page with our clients. And it's a way of checking we've understood the information that has been relayed to us or shared with us. So whilst we don't ask open questions, that's something we avoid. The only time we can ask a closed question is, sorry if I said open there, my mind's a bit crazy, I've had so much on today. So we avoid closed questions. The only time we can ask a closed question is when we are seeking clarity as a coach. So the client might have shared lots of information with us. We want to reflect that information back so we understand correctly. So for example, you shared that you want to work towards this promotion. There's a few issues with skills that you lack right now that you want to work on. And also you want to build up your confidence. Have I understood that correctly? That's a yes or no closed question, but it allows us to clarify that we've understood the information that has been shared with us. And it's good practice to do this, as I mentioned, to show that we're on the same page and we're understanding correctly what the client is sharing with us. So we're not making assumptions, our own judgment, and that can help us keep the conversation, the coaching conversation on track. Now, I've got a bit of a test for everybody who's tuned in, whether you're watching the replay, whether you are tuned in right now. I want you to engage with this little exercise that I've got. So a lot of coaches get confused. They can work on their compound questions. They can overcome their double barrel questions, which is also compound questions, with a bit of confidence and gaining confidence on their articulation. They can move away from closed questions to open questions. One of the things that we often observe a lot here at Coaching Minds is stepping away from those leading questions and fully understanding what a leading question is and a non-leading question is. So I'm going to be putting up some questions for the final little bit of part of today's session. I'm going to be putting on some questions onto the screen, and I want you to tell me whether you think it's leading or non-leading, and then we're going to have a discussion why. So the first question, do you think that your fear of failure is actually what is holding you back from starting this project? What do we think? Do you think that your fear of failure is actually what is holding you back from starting this project? Is it leading or non-leading? Put it in the comments box. Let me know your thoughts. And we're all here to learn. So if you get it incorrect, it's not a test. We're all here to learn and grow. So Razan is saying leading. Chantel's saying that it is leading as well. So we've got two people that are saying it's leading. That's correct. So this is actually a leading question. So I'm going to go back to that slide as well. So it is leading. And the reason why is any question that involves do you think, do you feel, or do you is the entrance to a leading question. Also, as a coach, any sentence, anything that you're doing in terms of your feedback, if you start with I think or I feel, you're bringing your assumptions, you're entering into opinion and judgment mode. So avoid do you think, do you feel at the start of your questions. Do you think, do you feel is actually the start to a leading question. There's also a couple other assumptions in that question as well, but everybody is correct, it is leading. Next question. Imagine it is 6 months from now and you are thriving in this new role. What is the first thing you notice? Is this a leading question or a non-leading question? I can see Adele saying leading, but that was from the previous one. There's a bit of lag on the comments, so I'm just going to give it here. Razan is saying non-leading. Non-leading. Okay, brilliant. Okay, now second up question. So you're correct. It is non-leading. Now my next question is, what type of question is it? For a bonus point on the exercise. So it's non-leading, but what type of question did we just ask there? Chantel saying non-leading, so everybody's getting it correct. That's brilliant. Good stuff. What type of question is it? So there's a bit of lag on the comments. I'm going to tell you it is hypothetical. I can see Adele's just put that there. It is a hypothetical question because we are putting the client in a scenario 6 months from now. We're asking them to imagine that 6 months from now, which is a hypothetical situation. And we're telling them that they're thriving in this new role, and we're asking what is the first thing they notice. So it's a hypothetical question. So brilliant stuff there. Next question. If you look back on this week with total honesty, where did you let your own procrastination get the better of you? Is this leading or non-leading? If you look back on this week with total honesty, where did you let your own procrastination get the better of you? Chantel is saying leading. Leading or non-leading? Adele is saying leading, and Razan is saying non-leading. So the correct answer here is it's actually a leading question. You are putting the assumptions of procrastination. So you're bringing procrastination into there. Where did you let your own procrastination get the better of you? Now, the reason why it's leading is because we don't have any context. Where this might not be leading is where the client has actually used the words procrastination and the client is talking about their procrastination and we're reflecting it back to them. But putting in your, where did you let your own procrastination get the better of you? The assumption there is on procrastination. You pulled that from the context, from what is shared. And if the client hasn't called it procrastination or hasn't used the word procrastination, then it's a leading question. You're leading the conversation into them thinking about their procrastination, which is an assumption. So the correct answer there is leading. Next question. What feels most alive to you right now about this opportunity? Leading or non-leading? What feels most alive to you right now about this opportunity? What do we think? Del saying non-leading, Razan saying non-leading, everybody saying non-leading. Brilliant. Correct. It is non-leading. So what feels most alive to you right now about this opportunity? It's a reflective question. We're asking to sit back and reflect on the situation and what emotions, what feels alive, bring a bit of emotion in there as well to get them to think about this opportunity in a different light. So it is non-leading. And finally, the last question of today, then we're going to bring the session to a close. Leading or non-leading, what is the most courageous step you could take this week? Leading or non-leading? What is the most courageous step you could take this week? Chantal is saying leading. Anyone think it's non-leading? So a couple people leading. Adele is saying non-leading. So the correct answer here is it's actually a leading question. Why? Why do we think this? So this is the most tricky one here. Why do we think this is a leading question? So what is the most courageous step you could take this week? Now I'm going to give you a clue. If I was to ask this and say, what is the biggest step you could take this week? Or what is one small step you could take this week? That wouldn't be a leading question. Why do we think this is a leading question based on that clue? Let's see if anybody's putting in the chat. So Razan saying it depends on the content. It does. And Chantal saying courageous. Razan saying courageous. Courageous is an assumption. So if we ask, for example, what is the biggest step or a small step you can take, this is something that can be measured. We're asking them to come up with a biggest step. It's a measurable word that we can put in this. But courageous step is inserting an assumption that the step that they have to take needs to be courageous. It doesn't necessarily have to be courageous. It's actually imposing a little bit of one of our values if we think the steps that they have to take needs to be courageous. But as Razan said, it does depend on the context. But again, if they're not using the word courageous, maybe the context is still around fear and they need to overcome their fear and take a large step, we still should be playing back the words that they use. So the only way in which this would be a non-leading question is if the client themselves had used the word courageous. Courageous is an assumption where biggest step is something that can be measured. We're not saying, if they come to their own conclusion of what a big step is, what a small step is. But when we say courageous, it's an actually assumptuous word, and it actually imposes a little bit of value. So we might think courage is a great thing that we need. Courage might not be in their values. It might not be something they see. So, for example, if a coach came to me and told me that what courageous step, I would sit back and think, there's nothing needs to be courageous about this. I just need to take steps. I just need to move forward. So again, it's a sumptuous word. So be very careful on the language. Leading questions get tricky. Reflect and think about in your practice when you're asking questions whether or not it was leading. We're here at Coaching Minds to help you. So when you submit your assessments, we pick these up and we feed them back to you on how you can reword this. But just be careful with the language that you're using in your space, so you're not inserting assumptions, making sure you're playing back the words that the client is sharing to you, and you're thinking about the context. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's tuned in. If you're not part of Coaching Minds and you want to learn more, we do have a free resources page on our website with some tools and things that you can do. You can get free access to our ebook to read as well, Coaching Essentials. If you want to learn between these Coachology sessions, all you have to do is scan the QR code in the top hand corner here, and where it says more info. This will give you free resources. And if you're interested, maybe you like a hard copy, a hardcover of something, you can scan this QR code here. This will take you to Amazon and you can purchase our Coaching Essentials book. It's £12.97, so it's not going to break the bank. And I always recommend people, before you invest thousands or hundreds of pounds into a coaching course, this book is designed to help you to understand whether or not coaching is right for you. The last thing we want at Coaching Minds is for people to invest in our profession lots of money and find out that it's not for them and find it difficult to get that cash back. So please do check out our resources first, and then if you're interested further, purchase the Coaching Essentials book. So huge thank you to everybody who's tuned in, everybody who's watching on the replay. Thank you to Chantel, Razan, and Adele for their engagement with our questions and everything we've asked today, a little exercise of leading and non-leading. It's not always easy. Hopefully today has shown you that there's always room to improve with our questions. I'm still working on reflecting and building my questions and how I can ask better questions with the way in which I articulate. So we're all learning, we're all growing, but this gives us an idea of what to think about. So thank you to everybody who's tuned in. I look forward to seeing you in our next session next week. See you all very soon. Have a wonderful rest of the week ahead.